Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is the weekend review show for the weekend of January 17th through the 19th, 2020. We are going to walk through the top 10 of the box office. We had two new wide release openers, Bad Boys for Life and Dolittle. We'll do deeper dives on those. We'll talk a little bit about award stuff because we are in the season. We're a few weeks away from the Oscars. The nominations came out last week. I'll briefly mention those. We have Time Machine coming up with Chris, 1995. Really interesting weekend. Dumb and Dumber's involved, which is one of my favorite movies. Although perhaps not one of Chris's favorite movies. And then we'll finish out the show talking about what's going to happen the rest of January and hint at what is coming up in February. Let's dive into this top 10. Number one this weekend was Bad Boys for Life. The 3-day right now sits at $59 million. Expectation on this was maybe 30 for the 3-day. We are in a holiday. If you're listening not in the United States, this weekend or this week is sort of a holiday. MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, is on Monday. So this is a 4-day weekend for us here in America. So it is technically a holiday weekend. So a lot of the reporting is doing the 4-day holiday weekend numbers. Bad Boys for Life right now, or Bad Boys for Life, is looking like $70 million for the 4-day, which is just a huge overperformance to expectations. You know, the sort of consensus last week was, 30s for the 3-day, maybe 40s for the 4-day. This is almost, getting to close to doubling that. So it definitely is an overperformance. And why is that happening? Let's dive into the numbers real quick with Bad Boys for Life. One, audiences are loving this film. Like, the verified audience score is 97% on Rotten Tomatoes. Those are people who bought tickets and went to go see this on Fandango. 97% with a 95 actual score. All audiences is the same thing. 96% fresh score, 94 actual score. Cinema score of an A. Post-track score of 100%, which I've never seen before. And I think it was 4.5 stars, which gets you to like 90%. But I think the updated scores as of Saturday were 100% with a 73% definite recommend. These are outrageously high numbers. So the audiences are reacting to this film very, very well. Now, Bad Boys for Life, of course, is Bad Boys essentially 3. We had one movie in 95? And then we had the sequel come out in 2003. And it's been 17 years since we had a Bad Boys movie. So the team up of Will Smith and Martin Lawrence again is just it's seen as something special right now, which I didn't really expect, because if you had asked a lot of people 3-4 weeks ago how Bad Boys is going to do, it's January, it's kind of a dumping ground, right? It's just not a time to release a top tier, top shelf movie. But I think Sony took advantage of that and basically said, look, it's kind of a desert out here in January. Let's see if we can pop this movie off. And it has worked incredibly well. So 17 years later, we get Bad Boys for Life, which is now the best opening Bad Boys movie in existence. So let's recap a little bit of the history here. So Bad Boys, April 7th, 1995, production budget of $23 million, opens up to 15, closes out at $65 million total domestically. That's unadjusted though. Money has changed a lot since then. So the inflation adjusted domestic box office for Bad Boys 1 was $137 million back in April of 1995. Bad Boys 2 took a long time to get out here. July 18th, 2003 was the opening on that. Massive production budget, $130 million. Really bloated. That was back then when like action movies like this could easily get they give these people too much money, essentially, is what happens. Like, they give the producers and the director, like, here's $150 million, $130 million, go blow up a lot of stuff. That's how it was. A little bit different now with action movies. So opening weekend for Bad Boys 2 was $46 million back then. Domestic unadjusted was 138. Inflation adjusted box office domestic for Bad Boys 2 was 209. So a pretty good performance, but I think one of the reasons why we didn't get an immediate sequel, probably some scheduling stuff with Will Smith and Martin Lawrence, but also it didn't really pop off like it needed to. It did 273 unadjusted worldwide versus $130 million production budget. Back then, marketing for a movie like this, I can even begin to guess like $60 million, $70 million worldwide. So at least $200 million in costs. They recouped most of that on the box office, but it wasn't a hugely profitable film, which is one of the reasons why I think it took so long to sort of bring it back. This one will be profitable. So production budget of $90 million. It did, it's going to do $70 million or close to $70 million for the 4-day weekend. And so it will get a return on their investment here. Critics liked it a little bit less than the audience. 76% Rotten Tomato score, 61 actual score. Top critics was an 80% with a 62 actual score. So what you see there is sort of like they didn't hate it and they didn't love it. It's definitely more on the good side for critics, which I think is a little bit surprising for a movie like this. Obviously we talked about audiences loving it, like just ecstatic over it, which means it's going to have great legs and great word of mouth. Letterboxd score is a little bit lower, 66 out of 100. I thought it was going to be higher for this. Compared to Bad Boys the original, that's a 62 on Letterboxd. Bad Boys 2 is at a 60, so it's better than those, but lower than a recent action film, John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum, which has a 76 score on Letterboxd. I find that kind of interesting because John Wick just feels like a film snob action movie, which is what Letterboxd is, and that's probably why it's higher. This is the second best MLK weekend opening ever over American Sniper, which did 107. Sony is so happy with this performance. I think they already knew that it was going to pop off by Thursday night previews when those numbers started to come in, and so they're already prepping a fourth film. In terms of who showed up to Bad Boys for Life, 61% male, 39% female. That's probably a Saturday morning so far through the weekend. So that's a little bit, not necessarily that surprising, but it is very over-indexed on male. Usually it's about 55-45 for the average film, 55% male. So I guess, it's an action movie. You have two male stars. I just thought it would be a little more even here, especially with the performance too, because it has like extremely overperformed. You're expecting then that the female audience had showed up more than expected, but that didn't happen. Under 25 was 26%. Over 25 was 74%. That makes sense because Bad Boys is an older franchise. Older people, over 25 at least, seem like they're going to overrepresent the audience. Now, they normally do, but it's normally at a 66% of the audience. Here it's 74, so definitely over-index on the over 25 half of the audience. In terms of ethnic, racial makeup here, demographics, 39% of the audience was African-American. That obviously makes sense. Normally an audience is like 12 to 13% African-American. 33% Caucasian white, way under index from an average audience. Usually they're like 55%. Latinos are down a bit from normal, usually in the low 20s. Here they're 17. The Asian other was at 11%, which is right per normal. So, what does Bad Boys for Life, what is it going to do here long term? I think at least, obviously $100 million is in the bank domestically with ease. The question is, we got this 100% post-track score. We got this A cinema score. We got this outrageously high verified audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. That suggests at least a 3x multiple. And if we're doing that, then 150 is no joke, right? 150 is a given at that point. If we're hitting 3, we're looking at like 177, 180. It's also going to get a huge bump from tomorrow being a holiday. The question doesn't hang on. Is this a front-loaded movie? I think would be the big question. I don't think that it is. I think it came out right in this sort of dip in the schedule in January, which is usually, like I said, it's a desert. It's a barren desert where there's nothing usually coming out like this. But as something that has changed at the box office over the last few years is that, I think growing up with the summer box office movie season, there's essentially two high seasons in the industry. It's the summer and then it's the Christmas, Thanksgiving holiday. That has changed a lot though. I think I noticed it, or everybody noticed it, 4 or 5 years ago when February started to kick off with Valentine's Day becoming a major box office movie holiday. Stuff like Deadpool doing insanely well. And then we had Black Panther a couple of years ago, just really exploding in that time slot in February. And then, March has also become, so now the Easter holiday, Valentine's Day, now Easter is big. January, I think, was one of the lone holdouts of like not having huge blockbuster numbers like this. It just didn't happen because usually the first 2 weeks of January is all holiday hangover. all award stuff, all movies that opened in Christmas or even before then, Hanging On, Jumanji, Star Wars, stuff like that this year. But it has shifted. And in like also months like September, which are just everybody's going back to school, people going back to college, people coming back from vacation, going back to work, has always been a super quiet month, like very quiet. Like down here with January is one of the worst months, but then you had It pop off in 2017 and just crushed and did over $100 million in that post Labor Day weekend. So it's kind of an interesting sort of change, sort of systemic, holistic change to the industry where you can really open a blockbuster movie any month of the year now, when that wasn't the case 10, 15 years ago. So Bad Boys for Life is a great January open, and maybe could it leg out to $200 million domestic? It's just awesome. It's awesome to see this. It's also awesome to see an action movie that isn't a comic book movie do this well. This is a very sort of traditional buddy cop movie at the end of the day. We haven't seen a ton of those. We had the 21 Jump Street stuff do pretty well, but that was all kind of parody. It was ironic. This is less so. This is kind of reminds me a lot of Lethal Weapon, like the older guys sort of passing the baton to the younger crew, but sort of hanging on for one last ride. Well, it sounds like we're gonna get another ride from Bad Boys. Definitely Bad Boys 4. That will probably, my guess, they're gonna, because of this performance, and if it does hold on to do 150 to $200 million, which I think that it will here domestically, I think we'll get a Bad Boys movie in 2022. I don't think they're going to hold on for 3 years or 4 years. I want to get this thing out the door, especially because Will Smith and Martin Lawrence are getting pretty old. So they want to get it in the can and maybe pass the baton off to 2 other stars and continue the franchise kind of as long as I can. But that was number 1, Bad Boys for Life here on the weekend of January 17th through the 19th, 2020. Okay, in the number 2 slot, we have Dolittle. This is the Robert Downey Jr. family film, the $175 million trash fire that everybody knew was going to flop months ago, has flopped. So $22.5 million for Dolittle. Critics are eviscerating this film. 18% from all critics on Rotten Tomatoes, 41 actual score, 10% from top critics, 36 actual score. Verified audience isn't terrible. I mean, it's not the worst thing. 76%, 80 score. All audience was 73%, 77, very much in line with each other. Cinema score of a B. Post-tracks low at 57%. This is all what the critics think and what the audience thinks doesn't really matter, just because this thing was a flop from the moment it was announced, essentially. So Deadline goes over, there's kind of a bidding war for this property to have Robert Downey Jr. attached to this Dolittle film. So they greenlit the film at $175 million production budget, but there's all these reshoots. So the director on this one is the guy who did, if you remember, Syriana, which is like a very cold, sterile geopolitical thriller back in the aughts. It's one of my favorite films from that decade. I love it, but like, it's an art film. This guy's never really done a huge, big tent special effects family film, especially at this budget range of, $175 million. So very unproven. It didn't work out well. The director fought a lot with Robert Downey Jr., I hear. Tons of reshoots had to happen. They're bringing other directors. It was just, a total shit show from the start. I even had people posting on Reddit who worked on the film saying it was a shit show as they were working on it. So this thing was doomed from the beginning, unfortunately. At $22 million this weekend, probably hits 30 for the 4-day holiday weekend. But there's no way it's going to recoup costs on this. Let's just conservatively run some numbers. Okay, 175 is what they're reporting as the budget. We know that it's probably much higher than that. To market this thing worldwide, it is a worldwide release. So you're at least at the very minimum looking at $100 million. So you're at 275. I would say probably $300 million alone just in terms of baseline cost to market and produce this film. It's not going to make it back. And so how big is the loss going to be? It's not as bad as it could have been. Going into this weekend, I was like, does this thing make $15 million for the 3-day? Does it even hit $20 million for the 4-day? There was that possibility because people absolutely hated the film. Critics, it's one of the worst reviewed films from critics since Cats. I mean, it's in that level of just an abomination, at least from their perspective. So it could have been a lot worse, but I think Robert Downey Jr. did his best here to get out on the talk show circuit. He was on the Rogan podcast last week, which is a really big deal nowadays. I feel like the Rogan podcast is more important than any late night show at this point. I think like 7 million people have watched that video. So he did his part to get the word out here. He wants to recoup some of his money on this. Well, not recoup, but I think he probably has a back end deal. So the more money it does at the box office, the more money he makes personally. So a disaster. I don't understand why there was a bidding war for this film. I get that Robert Downey Jr. is like the top of the top A actors right now. Like, he's Iron Man. He just came off one of the most impressive runs ever with the MCU. And so he is a hot property. I get that. And this was probably greenlit 3-4 years ago, I would imagine. So I kind of understand the context of what they were thinking. I think the biggest issue here is just the Dolittle brand. Like, who remembers Dolittle? I'm older, I'm not super young, and I have a vague recollection of the old movie and the sort of character, but not really. And I can't even imagine somebody who's under the age of 30 what they're going to respond or think about this movie. It was just, it's one of those films that makes you think about the industry at large and sort of think, how are they going to survive this hyper competitive content space with Netflix and Amazon and every other company in the world getting into the content game via streaming, there to entertain people? How are they going to survive if they greenlight a movie like Dolittle that cost them essentially $300 million to release overall across the world? Like, it just doesn't, from a business perspective, it makes no sense that this was allowed to happen. But look, it's an industry. There's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of moving pieces and parts to it. Maybe Robert Downey Jr. was like, we got to make this movie. Let's make it. I really want to do this. And he sort of had the inertia and follow through to get it made. But this is it's a disaster for Universal. They're lucky they have the number 3 spot with 1917. So yeah, and at the end of the day, Dolittle is one of those films that, from somebody from an outsider's perspective, they look at that and be like, well, Hollywood's fucking broken and it makes no sense. And they're not wrong in this scenario. It's just they don't have a lot of these anymore. And it reminds me of what a lot of the executives were saying at the end of the year, end of the decade, retrospectives like in Variety, Hollywood Reporter, and Deadline about a month ago. One recurring theme that came back over and over again was that the box office and movie theater industry is just hyper cutthroat in terms of relationship between the studios, the exhibitors, AMC, Regal, and the audience, and that the wins are massive, but the losses are so much bigger than they've ever been before. And, you'll have a win like an Endgame or an Infinity War where the company's going to make $500 million in pure profit. But then you're going to have a movie like Dolittle that's going to be $100 million loss, and like take off that $100 million you just made from Endgame of profit, and it's gone. And so it's a very high up and down industry right now. I don't see that changing anytime soon. And Dolittle is just an example of how big a loss it can be. But yeah, Universal had the number 3 spot as well here. 1917, nice 40% drop. $22 million for the weekend. This thing is really cruising. Obviously, after that Golden Globes Best Picture win, $76 million total so far for 1917. Should continue to have low drops. I think it won the Producers Guild Award last night as well. So it's continuing its awards run. Did get nominated for Best Picture, but I don't believe it got an editing award or nomination. There's some like stat going around that basically I don't think there's ever been a film that has won Best Picture without being nominated for Best Editing, which is a really interesting stat. So that puts a couple of movies on the chopping block for Best Picture, like 1917, Little Women, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is very surprising. But in any event, 1917 from a box office perspective is a huge win for Universal. I think a very unexpected one. The trailer was fantastic. I thought it would play well with old people, but it is now, because of this awards run, playing well across all audiences. Number 4 was Jumanji, the movie that never goes away. This feels just like whatever it was 2 years ago. And I knew this was going to happen. I knew that in January and February we'd be talking about Jumanji. Minus 32%. This weekend with 9.5 million, $270 million so far. It's not gonna hit the original number of over $400 million domestic, but again, it's just something you can count on. We're gonna get another Jumanji movie. It's just one of the more impressive properties out there. Just because I don't know why it has such low drops. I don't know why it plays so well in its second month out. Is it The Rock? Is it Kevin Hart? Is it Jack Black? I don't know what it is about these movies where it just get people just keep coming back to see it over and over again. You have to wonder, is it repeat audiences here, or is it people just waiting to see it? Because there is a pattern. Like, normal movies do not behave this way. And sure, you have the holiday season and stuff like that, but there's other holiday movies that have faded out by now, and Jumanji just has these legs to it. I don't know. It's probably The Rock. Everybody loves The Rock. He should run for president. Maybe you will. Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker into the number 5 spot, 8.3 million, 45% drop. Just about to break. It'll break $500 million here domestically tomorrow on MLK Day. What can I say about Star Wars? Is there anything left to say about this film? It's an underperformance worldwide, without a doubt. They're gonna have to go back, not to the drawing board with Star Wars. It's just, I think it's disappointing from a box office nerd perspective, because has been such a bankable property. Force Awakens sort of proved that like, if you make an exciting Star Wars movie, it'll be one of the top movies of all time. But if you sort of lose your way with this trilogy like they did, Last Jedi, I think was a very interesting turn in the narrative. And then you kind of try and cover it up with a messy third film, people are not going to show up and like it. And that's kind of what happened with Star Wars: Rise of Skywalker. So if you looked at it on paper and left out the name Star Wars, you'd be like, wow, this is a really good performance. But of course, if you put the Star Wars name in front of it, it doesn't look so great, especially being a mainline Star Wars story. So Walt Disney has a little bit of sort of rebuilding to do with that franchise. I think they'll be fine. I believe there isn't a Star Wars movie coming out this year, right? I think it's probably 2021, and then those 3 years probably in a row. That's another thing too. It's like, it would have been fascinating if they had the mainline movies come out consecutively. I think that would have been awesome. Like, if they came out in whenever it was, 2015, 2016, and 2017 all in a row. I don't know if they could have done that, like with the production schedule and stuff, but that would have been awesome. I think they would have made a lot more money. But I think they just stretched it out. I think a lot of that has to do with like Solo not doing well and putting bad taste in people's mouth with the brand a bit. And I think it's just sort of, it's worn people down. And of course, the ridiculous toxic conversation around the films with gender and stuff like that has not helped. Okay, so that was number 5. Number 6 was Just Mercy. Great drop, 38% drop, $6 million, $19.6 million so far. I thought this was going to have a low drop. It didn't pop off all that much opening weekend like I thought it was. A+ cinema score. Not hardly any awards talk on this one at all. So that didn't help. It's going to end up being an okay performer, but like, definitely it feels like a major lost opportunity for Warner Brothers. They should have opened this thing way earlier. They opened it way too late in the season, and just has not, kind of the opposite of 1917, because it hasn't gotten any award stuff. It's just kind of going to disappear. But it could stick around with like low drops like this, which I think is going to happen. A sub 40% drop is awesome. And at the number 7 spot, we have another film that has that too. Little Women with a 24% drop. Just amazing. $5.9 million, $84 million for Little Women right now. Greta Gerwig. There's some controversy, so it was nominated for Best Picture, so I don't expect these drops to get much higher than this through the Oscars. It's going to play quite well. It's going to break $100 million easily. But Greta Gerwig did not get a Best Picture Best Director nomination, which is very controversial. But it doesn't matter from the money perspective. It's going to keep on making money. So Little Women in the 7th spot with 5.9 million. Number 8, Knives Out. Speaking of Star Wars, from Last Jedi director Rian Johnson. Lionsgate film, 4.3 million, 24% drop as well for that movie. $145 million is going to break $150 million tomorrow. What a performance for that. I kind of felt like it was going to break out and has matched those expectations and then some. What a performance for that movie. Number 9, Like a Boss, fading quickly here, 62% drop in its second weekend, $3.8 million, $16.9 million so far domestically for Like a Boss. That is not a good performer. Probably not a lot of money was put into that. But again, these comedies just not connecting with people. It's more of a streaming play right now for comedies, and Like a Boss kind of proves that, but I don't think a huge loss for Paramount. Number 10, Frozen 2, $3.7 million, 37% drop, sits at $464 million so far. I think it's going to leg out past Star Wars. It feels like it's going to. Great performance for Frozen 2, but we've talked about that movie a lot. Some new releases, Underwater. How did Underwater, did that come out last weekend? I guess it did, because it's the second weekend. 49% drop, which is not the end of the world, but it started out so low. $3.5 million this weekend for Underwater, 12.7 total. How much did that movie cost? Like $70 million bucks. Total disaster. Okay, so that is the top 10 and then some. Let me briefly talk about the Oscar stuff right now. So I woke up last week, Monday, 7 a.m. to watch the nominations live. So I'm so super into this. From a box office perspective, it's pretty interesting too. You know, Best Picture, Irishman, and A Marriage Story, obviously Netflix movies, so box office probably didn't have much to play in those. But I think that Ford vs. Ferrari getting the Best Picture nomination, definitely box office. Parasite as well, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Joker, Little Women. I think they got pushed forward because they financially were doing, especially Joker. You know, and Parasite, I would call both of those out as movies that are getting nominations because of their financial success, at least partly due to that, especially the Joker. I mean, how much did it make? It's an insane amount of money so far. Best Picture, not a lot of surprises there. 1917 obviously is riding that awards wave like we were talking about to make a lot of money at the box office. Best Actor stuff, nothing too crazy there. Best Actress role, Call It Here to Harriet, Cynthia Erivo, I believe, or Rivo. I'm not really sure how you pronounce her last name. But remember, Harriet did like $40 million out of nowhere. Huge reason why she got nominated here, because that was a very successful film. Other movies on here, Judy didn't do that well, so Renee Zellweger, I don't know, maybe she gets like the sort of Lifetime Achievement Award. Although she's already won all these Oscars and stuff, so I don't know if that's gonna happen. It's probably gonna go to Scarlett Johansson for Marriage Story. Bombshell, despite not doing well, Charlize Theron, the box office didn't do well. Did get a nomination for that. Actor supporting role, kind of, you know, the usual Tom Hanks, Pesci, Brad Pitt, Anthony Hopkins, Al Pacino. That's so boring. You know, that's just so freaking boring that we get. Like, look, Brad Pitt does not deserve to be nominated for his performance in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He was very good, but I just feel like he's being himself in this movie. So I don't really get that. Actress in a supporting role, Richard Jewell, Kathy Bates got nominated for that. That did terrible at the box office, so that didn't really sway the voters all that much. A lot of awards for Jojo Rabbit, and I don't think it had a wonderful performance at the box office at all. Same thing with Bombshell. So sometimes, you remember, like, how they're voting here, it's a select group of people. So the actors vote for the actor awards, the directors vote for the director award. You know, it's like a set small group of people voting here. So if they get the screener for Bombshell in November and they sit down and watch it in the living room and really like it, the box office doesn't really have a huge effect there. But I think what ends up happening is what they choose to watch is based on what they hear going around. And if they hear that Parasite's pushing, you know, almost $30 million domestically for a South Korean non-English film, they're peeking their ears up, like, and sort of like, what's going on here? And so other animated feature, Toy Story 4 is probably going to win that. How to Train Your Dragon, that's kind of an interesting pick there. Cinematography, Lighthouse got a nomination, which I think is cool. Hated the movie, but cool that it got a nomination. I gotta look at the directing is kind of a big one. So I did see Joker. You know, I talked about Joker a lot on this show. I'm not going to get into my personal feelings about the movie because I don't want to lose listeners. I'll just put it this way. I did not enjoy it. Who I really want to see here, I think, you know, Quentin Tarantino has a really good chance of winning this. Sam Mendes, Martin Scorsese as well. Bong Joon-ho, though, I think he's gonna take it. I think it's his year. It's just the Parasite's year. It could even win Best Picture. It's just one of those movies that like everybody loves, and I think they do like ranked choice voting now or something, or preference voting. So if a lot of people pick Parasite as like their number 2 film, it's gonna help a lot. It could be a dark horse here. Anything else to talk about Oscar stuff? It's pretty much like not any of that surprising stuff. But like I said, the Film Editing Award does predict the Best Picture winner, and so it's basically narrowed down to Ford vs. Ferrari, Irishman, Joker, Parasite, Jojo Rabbit. You know, it could go to Irishman, but I get this weird feeling in my stomach that Parasite's going to win. It just feels like it's that year for that movie. If Joker wins, I'm gonna be fucking pissed. Another call out here. How did France not choose Portrait of a Lady on Fire for their film? Instead did Les Miserables. I don't get it. I know Les Miserables is a very good film, but Portrait of a Lady on Fire is a masterpiece, and it pisses me off they didn't do it. Again, didn't make any money at the box office, so definitely heard it. Okay, that's mostly about the Oscar stuff. It's going to be exciting. It's in a couple of weeks. And of course, there'll be a box office bump for all of these. But I think the Best Picture stuff, Little Women's really getting helped by nominations. 1917 is getting helped a lot as well. Joker didn't need any help. Ford v Ferrari's kind of ended its run already. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood's getting a lot of DVD and VOD sales probably because of it. And I think Parasite's just going to keep rolling in art house theaters as it has a possibility of winning Best Picture. Okay, so that's awards chatter for now. Let's turn it over to Chris for the time machine.
Welcome to the Wildline Time Machine. My name's Chris. Thanks as always for joining me on this segment where we look at the past and future of the box office. Thanks, Dan, as always, for having me on the Wildline podcast. Let's talk about the year 1995. I love the 90s just like any other baby from the 80s. And yeah, this is a weird weekend. Weekend 3 of 1995, we had two films that were holdovers from the year 1994 and one debut. No, not debut. Sorry, a second week movie. There's no new releases in the top 3 of this weekend back in 95. Number 1 is a movie that was in its 5th week of release and made $9 million. 5th week, and still made it hit in the top of the box office. I guess I didn't realize how huge this movie was. I still haven't seen it. The only one of these 3 that I haven't. It's called Legends of the Fall, the Brad Pitt period piece. I don't know anything about it. I honestly, maybe I should have watched the trailer before I did this, but it just feels like it was so prevalent in the 90s that you didn't even have to see it. You just kind of knew. It was like golden hued period movie, Brad Pitt looking sexy, and what else did you really need to know? I think Jason Patrick was in it. I don't know. Maybe I'm misremembering it, but the star of Speed 2 Cruise Control co-starring in this movie that was, I think they were wearing like really open white shirts. I don't know. It's directed by Edward Zwick. It's like probably the biggest grossing period movie of that year, 1994, if you don't count Forrest Gump, which I don't because it's kind of in its own class. Speak of a movie that did not age well. That was the number 1 grossing movie of the year. Pretty standard awards, prestige drama. Forrest Gump made $329 million. Legends of the Fall only made 66 domestic, 160 worldwide. But I think it was still like a pretty huge hit. Obviously, it came out in December and kind of dominated the box office for the end of 94 and beginning of 95. And it was still made a good chunk of change if you compare it to the only $30 million budget. You couldn't do that with a period movie nowadays unless you're Little Women, which is the kind of only corollary, I guess you could look at comparing it to 1995 to 2019. Some other kind of just like prestige dramas that were also like kind of into the thriller zone were, bigger hits than Legends of the Fall. Back in 94, Disclosure made $83 million. Still also haven't seen that movie. But $92 million for The Client. I remember that being just so huge, and I was super into it because it, had a teenage character, but also was a more grown-up wide release. We've talked about this before, right? The straight drama does not really have a place in the box office nowadays unless it also is gunning for awards, and I don't think Legends of the Fall really had any, awards reach back then. Edward Zwick, what happened to this guy? This is a guy who tried to go for alternating between, the more art house release and the more wide-reaching, but still kind of pretty traditional drama or action drama or romance drama. He made Love and Other Drugs back in 2010, which only grossed $32 million. He made Jack Reacher Never Go Back in 2016, which made a modest but respectable-ish $58 million. He also had a couple really big bombs. He had a movie called Pawn Sacrifice back in 2015 that only made $2 million, and then he had a movie that came out just this year, Trial by Fire, with Liev Schreiber, and it only made $148K on a very limited release. This guy used to be kind of very reliable guy in the 90s and even in the early 2000s. But no, not so much. How the Mighty Have Fallen. Number 2 of this weekend in 1995 was a movie that I did not see when it was released. I think I saw it probably when I was in my mid-20s, and it's so good, you guys. If you've not seen John Singleton's Higher Learning, I would highly recommend it. It was in its second week of release and took the number 2 spot with $6 million. There's no reported budget for this movie, but I kind of did some estimating based on Singleton's movies both before and after Higher Learning. It probably was about a $20 million-ish budget, maybe 18 or 19. If you're being a little more conservative on the estimate. And it made $38 million domestic, which is not bad for, once again, like a pretty straight drama with a very kind of niche audience. Obviously, he's making movies featuring people of color, for people of color, but also he, blew the world apart with Boys in the Hood earlier in the 90s. And that's pretty respectable. It's specifically about like the racism and discrimination, but also like a Shakespearean tragedy set at a historically black college. It's a really fascinating movie and kind of underrated in terms of where Singleton has gone in the years. He obviously was most known for Boys in the Hood, but he also made Rosewood, another really solid period movie that was kind of forgotten in the 90s with Ving Rhames and an astonishing star turn. He also, of course, hit it big with Too Fast, Too Furious in 2003, where he made $127 million. And the first Shaft remake, the much more successful Shaft remake, not hugely successful, but once again, kind of modestly respectable-ish, $70 million, not bad at all. And I remember having a good time in the theaters, seeing that on opening weekend back in high school. He also kind of petered out after Abduction in 2011 with that guy from the Twilight movies, only $28 million for that. And then he kind of just faded into, producer roles, which, it's fine. And of course, we lost him regrettably last year in a long battle with cancer. And I cannot say good enough things about John Singleton. He probably single-handedly brought, along with Spike Lee, of course, black people into the spotlight in Hollywood in the 90s and made the world a much better place for it and got people really talking and thinking not only about race in America, but also class struggles and the element of talking about class and wealth in Higher Learning is just really smart for a movie that came out in 95 and also was a wide release movie. That's crazy. Compare that to nowadays. You have movies this year, like of course a Medea Family Funeral. Tyler Perry's kind of once again in his own class. That made $73 million. But look at Queen and Slim. Also, once again, like Higher Learning was kind of divisive, but not nearly as divisive as Queen and Slim. And that movie's still making $43 million. Dan's talked about that a lot on the podcast, that nobody was expecting that much for this kind of small artsy movie starring people of color, made by people of color. The weird thing about 95, that was also the year of education dramas. Probably the biggest one, which is the worst of I don't know. The other two are really bad. Higher Learning's a masterpiece in its own right, but especially compare it to the two bigger education dramas of the year. $84 million for Dangerous Minds and $82 million for Mr. Holland's Opus. Ugh. Two just wretched movies about education, and this is coming from somebody in the field of education. Too bad that Higher Learning is kind of the one that did not stand the test of time. I wish they showed that movie in high school classrooms instead of those other two. Okay, let's look at the number 3 release from this weekend in 1995, Dumb and Dumber. Yes, the Farrelly Brothers kind of classic. I don't know. It's hard to talk about anything good related to the Farrelly Brothers after that awful Green Book win at the Oscars and Golden Globes last year. But yeah, they used to make funny movies, and it's just so stupid. And of course, 1994 is also the year The Mask came out. This was the 6th week of release for Dumb and Dumber, and it's still in the top 3 with $5 million on a $16 million budget. Ended up making $127 million domestic, $247 million worldwide. That's crazy for a movie where it's, Jim Carrey obviously had a lot of pull after Ace Ventura, and The Mask also came out that year, $119 million. But this is insane about just two guys being dumb. It's like a road trip movie, a romantic comedy, kind of, not really. But like compare that to other comedies that came out in 94. 101 million for Maverick, which also was a strangely successful movie for being like a Western romance comedy. But we see strange things going on today too, right? Like Knives Out with 141 million for like a murder mystery comedy from the director of one of the most divisive movies of the decade, Rian Johnson. But then like look at, once again, we've talked about this, classic comedies, not really a big place for them in the box office nowadays. Good Boys was probably the biggest hit this year with 83 million. What Men Want is probably after that with 54 million. Yeah, this is nuts. This is crazy. But yet you still had movies like The Flintstones making 130 million overall in 94. Peter Farrelly kind of broke with his brother and started making other more respectable movies, but he also like tried to do like the traditional comedy thing for a long time, all the way through Hall Pass in 2011, which only made 45 million, and The Three Stooges in 2012. I totally forgot that movie existed, with 44 million. And then he kind of did a Hail Mary reuniting Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels for Dumb and Dumber 2. That is not the Dumb and Dumberer prequel, which I don't think the Farrelly brothers had anything to do with from the 2000s. But Dumb and Dumber 2 made 86 million in 2000, whatever that was, 16 or something. And then, of course, he made 85 million with Green Book, and he's probably going to make even more money with whatever tripe he comes up with next. But yeah, weird weekend as usual. 1995, rest in peace. Let's take a look at the future. We have a couple artsy movies I want to talk about that are coming out that are probably going to get some awards recognition with Sundance happening right now, and then movies getting sold. But then there's also one big kind of sequel reboot that I'll talk about as well to make things not as dull in this little segment of the Wildline Time Machine. First, let's talk about a big release ensemble movie that has been getting a lot of buzz from first-time writer-director Camille Griffin. It's called Silent Night. It stars Keira Knightley, Matthew Good, Roman Griffin-Davis from Jojo Rabbit. It's a Christmas festive family comedy that will probably have some like dramatic undertones. And there's just like Marv Films and Maven Pictures working together, Matthew Vaughn's production company and Andrea Arnold's production company. So Maven put out American Honey back in 2016. Marv put out Rocketman this past year and is going to put out The Kingsman this upcoming year. So they've got tons of money to throw around, and I think they're trying to, after the Golden Globe success of Rocketman, though it kind of got shut out except for original song at the Oscars, they're looking for some of this prestige stuff. And it's always good. We're looking for women, and this is interesting because it's not just, an up and coming. This is someone who's been around. She's been a clapper loader and electrical department head in a lot of movies, going all the way back to like Sliding Doors and The Phantom Menace in the 90s. And, somebody's given her a shot to get behind the camera, and this is, whether it's due to some of the initiatives due to the Time's Up movement, or, she just really had a really great script, or hopefully it's both, and Keira Knightley is, I think, poised to have a little bit of a prestige comeback after kind of slumming it in small, forgettable movies like Colette back in 2018 and The Nightcrummer, The Nutcracker and the Four Realms supporting role. So, yeah, good for her. And this Roman Griffin-Davis kid seems to be blowing up, and who knows. Let's talk about another movie that is even more exciting because it's from a playwright that is turning to the behind the camera. Florian Zeller is a really accomplished French playwright, and he made this movie called The Father as a play that debuted in Paris in 2012 and won the Moliere Award. And it sounds like a very simple premise, but it's not. It doesn't feel overdone. We have a father-daughter relationship, which we don't see very often. It's Olivia Colman and Anthony Hopkins, which is just like a mighty powerhouse duo. And they look back at the past, and perhaps there's some element of, what happened to the mother. So it seems really compelling for award season next year, but also it could just fade into the background, right? Anthony Hopkins has not really had a big movie until, The Two Popes this past year. But look back, like the last big movie he did was one of the biggest box office bombs of all time. It was Collide back in 2017, which I totally forgot about and only recognized from the movie poster. That movie only made $2 million. It was like that action film about the couple that tries to, do this huge big heist for the medical bills of their family or some bullshit. Olivia Colman's been having a great couple of years after winning the Oscar for The Favorite. That movie made over $34 million at the box office. Once again, crazy for a period movie. She had a movie come out this year that I thought was going to have a bigger splash, but didn't end up doing so. Them That Follow has a really cool trailer, but only made $159K and just kind of got lost in the shovel. Never really made it out of the LA, New York release. Sony Picture Classics is doing this one. They had a relative art hit with Pain and Glory this year, 28 million and counting. And of course, The Wife last year made 18 million, and probably their biggest hit of the decade was Call Me by Your Name back in 2017, 41 million. And I think with the right marketing, and if it turns out to actually be good, the Father could be one to watch for next awards season. Okay, let's talk about the one that's legitimately exciting in terms of like big box office numbers. The Matrix 4 announced its full cast this week. Of course, you got Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss returning. No Lawrence Fishburne, though. Supposedly, Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, who played Cal in the Watchmen series, is going to play a young Morpheus. That's only reported, not official. But also, Patrick Harris and Jada Pinkett Smith, which is supposedly a returning role. I guess maybe she was in Revolutions or Reloaded or both of them. I saw those movies once, but The Matrix, the original, of course, is a classic and still holds up, I think. The other two, I don't know. Lana Wachowski is returning behind the camera, I think, without her sister. I don't know, maybe her sister's only going to be in a supporting producer role, but whatever. Wachowskis have made, of course, a big number of interesting sci-fi fantasy movies over the years since The Matrix broke out. Jupiter Ascending, which I thought was going to be fun, but just ended up being a drag back in 2015. Made 47 million. Not horrible, still not good. They probably lost money on that. 27 million is probably the bigger loss for the adaptation of Dave Mitchell's Cloud Atlas back in 2012. Yikes. Too bad for that one. Interesting failure, that one. And then Speed Racer, a lot of people stand that. I still don't have good memories of it. 43 million back in 2008. Can the Wachowskis bring it back with The Matrix 4? I don't know. But it is interesting to think about. Warner Brothers Village Roadshow is teaming back up. Of course, they had a fantastic year putting out The Joker with 328 million as I think an official final total for that movie. Ocean's 8 back in 2018 made 297 million. Ready Player One, also 2018, made 582 million. I can't believe that movie made that much money. I guess I didn't realize that. I thought that was around 300 as well. But 582, that's nuts. That's all I got for you this week. Thanks for listening, as always, to the Wildline Time Machine. Back to you, Dan.
All right, that was a Time Machine with Chris. Legends of the Fall is definitely one of those movies, like if you were a conscious child in the 90s, you probably saw that movie or clips of it. I don't think I've ever seen it the whole way through either. I feel like my sister taped it off HBO, and maybe I've seen like parts of it like 20, 30 times, but I could not piece the plot together whatsoever right now for you. But it was one of those movies that was everywhere just because Brad Pitt was like, the biggest movie star in the world back then. But like totally forgotten as a film. You ask anybody under the age of 30 if they ever even heard of it, they're going to say no. Higher Lurian's awesome. A really fascinating film from the 90s that if you have not seen, please do see it. It is really relevant to right now, and I think it does sort of. It's not a perfect film. There's parts that are a little bit schlocky or whatever, but like I think the ideas that he's diving into and analyzing and themes are wonderful and interesting, and still incredibly relevant to what's going on right now. Dumb and Dumber, a little contention here. I think Dumb and Dumber is a classic film. It's a classic American comedy. I remember like right around the 20-year mark, so that would have been like 2015. I rewatched it with a group of friends, and I was blown away by how good it was. And like, yeah, it's stupid. It's Farley Brothers. Yeah, they have baggage now. Whatever. You kind of have to separate that out from the film itself. It is just one of the funniest movies I've ever seen in my life. it stands the test of time across the board. So I don't know. I just think it's a wonderful film, and it's going to go down as one of the better comedies of that decade easily. And I think it will be remembered for a long time. And it did, financially did pretty well as well. Of the newer movies that Chris was talking about, The Father looks pretty interesting. It debuts at Sundance here, and I guess, is it soon, like this week or next week or something? Sony Picture Classics, who knows what they're going to do with that movie? They fucked up Call Me By Your Name so bad. That movie could have been like the ultimate mean movie of that year. It didn't happen at all. So I don't really trust them with these limited art releases. They've never been great at it. They've never, what are their huge hits or huge breakout art films in the last couple of years? I don't know. I don't know if that's going to go anywhere. Keira Knightley deserves a lot more amazing work. She's a wonderful actor. She really has slummed it for a long time, but it's more like I think she's chosen a different path. She was huge back, or she got her start like Bend It Like Beckham. When was that? 2003, 2004. And obviously had all that stuff, the mainline movies. Was it Pirates in the Caribbean that she was like massive in? I think that's right. But she had a lot of stuff going on, Love Actually, all that kind of stuff. And then for like the last 5, 6, 10 years, maybe, she's definitely done these arty independent films. And a lot of them have not worked out very well. I look back to something like her and Mark Ruffalo in Begin Again, which I think could have been a huge film, but just didn't follow traditional romantic film. It's not even a romance movie. You couldn't really classify it. It's not really a comedy. It's not really drama. And so she's done a lot of films like that are interesting films. And her acting has gotten extraordinary. She was a good actor to start out with when she was younger, where now she is really a force to be reckoned with. And I do feel like she is going this prestige route. And I think she's going to do some amazing stuff for the next decade. I think she's really, her career is going to age quite well. Matrix, I don't know, man. Does anybody want another Matrix movie? I guess we can do another one. Keanu's back, so that's cool. The guy from Mindhunter and Looking's in it as well, whatever his name is. So I'm like not that excited about it. Like, if you want their type of work, go watch Sense8 on Netflix, which is awesome and a lot of fun and totally them. But like the new Matrix, I don't know. I just don't think we need it. The second Matrix movie sucked. The third Matrix movie was an abomination. The only good Matrix movie was the first one, and that was like lightning in a bottle. We don't need to revisit that world. I just don't think we need it at all. And if you're gonna do it as like a TV series or something like that. Don't it as another movie. So I'm not super excited about that one. Okay, so let's talk about what's gonna happen over the next few weeks here at the box office and see what we got coming out. Also, I didn't mention Weathering with You, which was a wide release this last weekend. It did okay. It's an anime movie. I didn't really know much about it. It's done $179 million worldwide. So that's awesome. It's only done $4.7 million here domestically. I just want to mention that. It looks gorgeous. I don't know anything about the film, but like people are posting stills from it on Twitter, and it looks just like one of the most beautiful films out there. So definitely, if you're into the anime stuff, check that one out. Okay, so what is coming out over the next few weeks? I think that like being in January, it is kind of a tough month for the box office. Next weekend's kind of evidence of that. We have The Gentleman from SDX coming out. This is the Guy Ritchie film. It feels like it's getting dumped in January. The Turning feels maybe not getting dumped, but I feel like The Turning's just kind of using the slow January month to try and make some cash. Mackenzie Davis is the lead here. She's wonderful, a wonderful actor. I don't know if she's gonna be able to carry this film, but since The Grudge did so bad, we have not had a good horror film in a while. So I think The Turning could do well. Gentleman, I don't see doing well at all. It's just that it hasn't been enough promotion for it. Maybe the under 25 male audience will show up, but I don't even know they know it exists yet. So the 31st, Gretel Hansel. I know it's not going to do well, but I want it to do well because it looks amazing. That's going to kind of like an artier horror film. It could break out, could be very memey with the film Twitter crowd, but I don't know if it's gonna make any money. Rhythm Section also on the 31st, Blake Lively geopolitical spy espionage thriller thing. Terrible title. If they changed the title, it could have done well, but that title is just shit. I don't even want to buy a ticket for a movie they call The Rhythm Section. I was like, this is just dumb. Unless this is a movie about like a big band or something like that. Like, I don't want to. I don't get why you would do that. Just call it Blake Lively. Just call it Blake Lively the movie, and yeah, I'll go see it. It sounds cool. Rhythm section? No, I don't know what that is. Especially like old people. Like, come on, you gotta think about branding, folks. Okay, so that's it. And then we get into February. Let's talk a little bit about February and close out the show. Birds of Prey, the Harley Quinn movie, comes out on the 7th from Warner Brothers. Tracking on that, no idea. No idea what's going to do. $50 million, $80 million opening weekend? Not a clue. There is a weird sort of alt-right campaign against it. Of course, any movie with a woman gets attacked by stupid men, and they're doing it again. So I don't think it's going to affect that opening all that much. I was not super like stoked about the performance of this film or potential performance, but as we get closer to Birds of Prey, I'm kind of feeling some buzz pop up a bit. I didn't like the trailer all that much, but I feel like right now is a good spot to open this. You'll have basically Bad Boys owning January. Does this own at least the first part of February? It's possible. Then we have the huge jam-packed Valentine's Day weekend, which are only about a month away from now. Downhill, Fantasy Island, The Photograph, Sonic the Hedgehog, What About Love? Fantasy Island looks cool. And I think Sonic the Hedgehog is going to bomb. So there's a lot of stuff coming out that weekend. Nothing really looks like it's going to be a super massive breakout. What else is coming out February? Call of the Wild on the 21st and Brahms the Boy 2. Should I know what that movie is from SDX? Brahms the Boy 2. Yeah, I have no idea what that's about. It looks insane. It's a horror film. I don't think it's going to do very well. Call of the Wild does not look good. Harrison Ford is too old to be doing this stuff. What is he doing with his life? He needs to sort of like do directing or something, or do more prestige films. Go back to like, I don't know, what was an art film that Harrison Ford had done? I can't remember one. He should do that stuff though. The 28th is The Invisible Man. Wow, February is a graveyard. Birds of Prey, and like I thought Valentine's Day would be a pop-off weekend, but like there's too much stuff opening. It's all gonna be crossfire on Valentine's Day. You know, no one's gonna know what to take their date to go see. I think Birds of Prey is really gonna benefit from a slow February. The 21st is a dead zone. The 28th, Invisible Man's going to pop off. Everybody knows this. We all love Elizabeth Moss, despite the fact that she is a Scientologist. We'll just have to push that to the side. It looks like a Blumhouse little mini classic in the making here. Looks good. Plus it's the only movie opening that weekend. It's a weird year at the box office. The next like massive potential over $100 million opening outside of Birds of Prey, and I'm just going through the list, I might be missing one. It kind of looks like Quiet Place Part 2 on March 20th. And then Mulan, I think it's going to do quite well on March 27th. But yeah, wow. A weird February. So the next big one to look forward to is Birds of Prey on February 7th. In any event, folks, thanks for listening. This has been the Wildline Podcast. We will be back next weekend.